You have 60 days to vacate or will escalate to county condemnation. Those were the first words Laura Brenner read when she opened the envelope left on her front gate. No knock, no warning. Just an unsigned notice from the Cedar Ridge Estates HOA, stamped in red and stapled to a grainy black and white photo of her own porch. It was taped to the fence post like a threat, not a courtesy. Laura stood motionless in the driveway, fingers tightening around the paper. She glanced toward the porch. Same one she'd rebuilt after the storm last spring. No rot, no loose rails, just a small chipped tile on the edge of the steps, courtesy of her old retriever Max trying to chase a squirrel that didn't exist. Now that porch was being called a hazard. The letter was worse than a complaint. It wasn't a simple please repair. It wasn't a fine, it was an accusation, one that claimed her home had fallen below the standards of community safety and that the HOA had voted unanimously to recommend it for condemnation. She blinked hard, trying to understand. Condemned? For a chipped tile and a faded coat of paint? This wasn't enforcement, this was erasure. 3 days earlier she'd skipped the HOA meeting. She didn't think much of it. She rarely attended anymore. The meetings had turned into performance art for Russell Kinley, the HOA president who treated every vote like it was the State of the Union and every fence like it was a matter of national security. Russell had been trying to get Laura to sell her home for over a year, ever since a tech developer offered to reimagine the block. Several of the older houses had already flipped, but Laura's was a holdout. The house wasn't flashy, it was quiet, lived in, her late parents' place. She had moved back in after her mom passed and never left. The property backed up to a tree line. It didn't scream luxury, but it was hers, paid off, and it came with something the HOA didn't know about yet. Not just one deed. 2. She walked back inside, the notice still clutched in her hand. Max followed close behind, as if sensing her tension. She sat down at the kitchen table and laid out the documents. The condemnation letter, last year's repair invoices, the letter from the city inspector after her renovations, property structure sound. No observable hazards. Exceeds minimum safety code. She wasn't behind on dues. She wasn't breaking any laws. But the HOA had made their move anyway. Because this wasn't about her porch. It was about pressure. Across the street, her neighbor Stella stood watering the flowers on her porch. She called out softly, "Laura, you okay?" "Got a letter," Laura said. "One of those letters." Stella walked over, wiped her hands on her gardening gloves, and skimmed the top half of the page. Her eyes widened. "Condemnation? That's insane." Laura nodded. "They want me gone. Think if they can make it unlivable, I'll cave." "You're not going to, right? Not even close." That night Laura pulled out the old metal box from the hallway closet. Inside were the original deeds, one for her house, and one for the narrow wooded lot directly adjacent. It had belonged to her father's business partner, and was sold to her in a quiet transaction 15 years earlier. The lot looked like an overgrown greenbelt, but it was zoned residential and still counted as privately held. She'd never touched it, never needed to. But now it was her wild card. Because if the HOA wanted to push boundaries, they'd better be ready to find out where the real ones were drawn. Laura Brenner didn't respond to the condemnation notice. She didn't storm into the HOA office or call Russell Kinley to demand an explanation. She didn't argue on Facebook or alert the neighbors just yet. Instead, she made a pot of coffee, set the deed papers on her kitchen counter, and opened her laptop. Because this wasn't going to be handled emotionally. It was going to be handled legally and surgically. She started with the HOA charter, line by line, clause by clause. There it was, Section 9.2, Structural Integrity Escalations. It laid out the conditions under which the board could refer a property to city code enforcement only after 3 written warnings, certified inspections, and at least 1 homeowner hearing. Laura had received none of those. No inspections, no hearing, no paper trail, just a single letter tacked to her fence like a death sentence. That alone was enough to challenge it. But she wasn't going to stop there. Next she pulled up the plat map from the county website. She zoomed in on her address, her house on one lot, then the narrow wooded strip to the left, just wide enough for a single structure, oddly shaped, boxed in by fences from 4 adjacent homes. That lot was hers too, still listed in her name, tax paid, maintained, untouched, and more importantly, landlocked, accessible only through her own driveway. She printed the map, highlighted the boundaries, and attached a copy of the deed. The HOA had no clue she owned that strip of land, but they were about to find out. She flipped open the spiral-bound notebook she used for budgeting and scribbled a new list. Deed copies, HOA charter violations, code enforcement review, timeline of correspondence, property photos, adjacent lot documentation. Then she opened a new folder on her desktop and labeled it HOA Retaliation, Cedar Ridge Estates. She didn't need drama, she needed receipts. The next morning she drove downtown to meet with a friend, Cal Watson, a former city planner turned private zoning consultant. They sat across from each other at a corner booth, her folder spread open across the table between them. Cal flipped through the documents with raised eyebrows. They filed a condemnation recommendation based on this? They're hoping I'll sell, she said flatly. They've been pushing me since last year. Laura, this isn't sloppy, it's predatory. They skipped procedure and filed a notice they had no legal right to initiate. He tapped the deed to the wooded lot. This though, this changes everything. That's the one they don't know about. Cal smiled. Yet, by Thursday she had everything scanned, labeled, and in order. She drafted an email addressed to the HOA board, Russell included. She kept the tone neutral, not angry, just matter of fact. Dear board, I received an unannounced notice indicating an attempt to condemn my property. I've attached the relevant legal documentation showing no such authority has been granted under your own bylaws, nor through city code enforcement. In addition, I'm including documentation of an adjacent parcel under my ownership, Lot 41B, bordering the eastern boundary of the development. This property has been held privately for 15 years and was never disclosed to the association. Please consider this formal notification that any decisions involving my properties will require legal review going forward. I'll be presenting these materials at the next open board meeting for record. She hit send. Then she closed the laptop and waited. The silence lasted less than 24 hours. By Friday evening, she received a reply, signed by Russell himself. Dear Miss Brenner, thank you for your message. I believe there has been a misunderstanding regarding the nature of the board's concerns. The notice was intended as a preliminary advisory and should not be interpreted as a formal legal action. We will pause any further discussion until the next HOA meeting. It was backpedaling, elegant, subtle, rehearsed, but beneath it, fear, because Russell had just realized he overplayed his hand, and Laura hadn't just called his bluff, she'd brought a second hand to the table. The HOA meeting was scheduled for 7 p.m., but by 6:45, the folding chairs in the Cedar Ridge clubhouse were already full. People who had never attended before leaned against the walls, whispering quietly. A few clutched copies of the latest newsletter. Others stared toward the front table where Russell Kinley sat with his arms crossed and an unbothered smile plastered across his face. Laura Brenner walked in alone, a flat manila envelope under one arm and a calm, unreadable expression. She didn't look like someone who had been threatened with losing her home. She looked like someone who had come prepared. Russell adjusted the microphone, tapping it once. Let's begin. First, a quick clarification regarding the structural notice recently issued to Lot 42, Miss Brenner's residence. That notice was not a condemnation filing, as some have mistakenly reported, but a courtesy advisory based on long-term infrastructure concerns. Heads turned. Laura didn't move. He continued. Unfortunately, social media has amplified misinformation. This board would never act outside its charter, and any suggestions to the contrary are deeply regrettable. That was the play. minimize the threat, frame her response as overreaction, pretend they'd done nothing wrong. It would have worked 6 months ago. But now, the room was listening, and Laura stood. "I'd like to speak." Russell hesitated, then nodded. "Go ahead." She walked to the center aisle, holding the envelope in one hand like it weighed nothing at all. "I'd like to enter into record a formal objection to the HOA's handling of my property status. I have here documentation showing the board violated Section 9.2 of its own charter by issuing a condemnation threat without inspection, warning, or due process." She held up the papers. "I also have permits, signed city letters, and inspection clearance confirming that my home is structurally sound and fully compliant." A few people in the crowd shifted forward in their chairs. One woman nodded quietly. Another scribbled something on a notepad. Laura continued, her tone steady. "But more importantly, I'd like to clarify something the board may have overlooked." She unfolded a color print of the county plat map and clipped it to the presentation board near the podium. "This is Lot 41B. She tapped the long, narrow stretch of land boxed in by fences. "It was deeded to me over 15 years ago. It shares a property line with the development. No one has access to it except through my driveway." Russell narrowed his eyes. "That lot was never disclosed to the association, because it predates the development," she replied. "It's not subject to HOA jurisdiction." Gasps rippled through the room. "That's private property," someone murmured. "And she owns it. Since when?" Laura raised her voice just slightly, not enough to sound combative, but enough to make sure the next part landed. "I never mentioned it before because I never needed to. But when this board tried to condemn my home based on false claims, without evidence or process, you gave me every reason to bring it forward." She paused. "So here it is. In writing. Recorded. Certified." She stepped back and placed the map and deeds on the front table. "I'm not going anywhere, and from now on I'll be reviewing every decision that affects the lots around me, because now they affect me too." Russell's smile faltered. "Let's not confuse personal grievance with civic duty. The board acted on concerns submitted by other residents. No one on my street reported me." Laura interrupted. "I checked." A few heads turned toward the board. One man raised his hand. "I live 2 doors down. We never had a problem with Laura's house." No one did. Another voice followed. "Is this about that new buyer? The one who wanted a connected strip for the easement?" Now Russell was on his heels. Elise, one of the newer board members, leaned into her mic. "I think we need to table this until a full legal review. This isn't a minor policy question. This could affect zoning." Russell opened his mouth to push back, but the room wasn't with him anymore. Laura didn't gloat. She just gathered her folder, nodded once to the board, and walked back to her seat. She hadn't threatened. She hadn't yelled. She hadn't even raised her voice. But she'd made something clear. If they wanted to take her land, they'd have to go through her other land to do it. And now the whole neighborhood knew it. On Monday morning, Laura opened her mailbox and found a violation notice folded between a landscaping coupon and a community newsletter. It was smaller than the last one. No dramatic staples or red ink this time, just a printed slip of paper inside a standard envelope. Notice of fence encroachment, Lot 42. The body text was short, legalistic, and rigidly cold. "Our records indicate that your fence line may extend 18 inches into common area property. Please remove or relocate the fence to avoid further action." She stared at it for a moment, not in shock, not in fear, just disappointment, because Russell hadn't learned. He wasn't going to stop. He was just going to get sneakier. 2 days later, a truck showed up unannounced at her curb. White, unmarked. 2 men with reflective vests and measuring tape walked the perimeter of her property, not speaking, not knocking, just jotting notes on a clipboard. Max barked from the porch. Laura stepped outside. "Can I help you?" One of the men looked up, mildly startled. HOA sent us. Said there was a boundary concern. You're on private property. You can leave now. The man hesitated, then nodded. They left without another word. That afternoon, Laura called the county zoning office. She requested parcel boundary confirmation and formal documentation of Lot 41B's adjacency rights. Then she asked for one more thing, a full record of past HOA permit applications for the last 5 years. It arrived the next morning, and that's when she saw it. 4 months earlier, the HOA had filed a provisional easement request, not for her property, but for the strip behind it. They wanted to connect the back lots of 4 homes to a side access road. The only problem, their proposed easement went directly through Lot 41B, her lot, the one they didn't know she owned. Until now, the permit had been denied due to unclear ownership and access rights, and suddenly, it all made sense. This wasn't just about getting her to sell, it was about clearing a path. She was in their way, and they were trying to remove her, not by vote, not by negotiation, but by attrition. Fence violations, safety concerns, property encroachment claims. It was never about her porch. It was about the land beside it. Laura didn't go public yet. She did something worse. She emailed the board, all of them. Attached were the fence survey photos, the zoning records, and the original permit denial with the highlighted easement overlay. Subject line, cease and desist, Lot 41B interference. Her message was brief. This is now a legal boundary. Any further attempts to access or alter Lot 42 or Lot 41B without written permission will result in a formal complaint to county zoning and civil litigation for property harassment. Please consider this your final courtesy notice. The next board meeting was packed. More residents than ever showed up, and this time, Laura didn't have to say a word. A man named Gary Novak, who lived 2 streets over, stood up during the open floor. Can someone explain why a private property owner received a condemnation letter when no official inspection was done? Russell cleared his throat. We believe there were safety concerns. Then why didn't you file a safety inspection request first? Gary cut in. Why jump to condemnation? A woman behind him added, why has this board filed permit requests for land it doesn't own? And then Elise, measured quiet Elise, slid a document across the table. We found the easement request in the board's archives. Russell submitted it himself. All eyes turned to Russell. He opened his mouth, then closed it, because there was nothing left to spin. The following morning, Laura woke up to a voicemail. Hey, it's Elise. The board's requesting a special vote next week. You won't need to attend, but I thought you'd want to know. It's about Russell. The vote passed by a landslide. Russell was removed as president. 3 days later, he resigned entirely. No speech, no post, no sign. He was just gone. But Laura wasn't done. That weekend, she installed a new sign on the edge of Lot 41B, a clean engraved wood post with 3 simple words. Private property. No excess. She didn't post about it, didn't gloat, but the message was clear and visible from the community trail. The HOA had been planning to pave right through her land. The next HOA newsletter didn't mention Russell by name. No apology, no explanation, just a cold 2-sentence update buried between announcements about lawn height violations and community mulch day. The board has accepted the resignation of HOA President Russell Kinley. We thank him for his service. That was it. But no one needed more. By now, everyone knew the story, and more importantly, they had chosen which part of it they believed. At the following monthly meeting, Elise sat at the head of the table. Her posture was more relaxed than before, but there was still a weight behind her voice, one that hadn't been there when she was just another quiet board member under Russell's thumb. She opened with a new agenda item, a proposal for transparency reforms. From now on, she said, all permit applications must be reviewed by no less than 3 board members and posted publicly before submission. No more closed-door zoning moves. No more private access deals. Someone near the back clapped softly, then another. Soon it rippled across the room. Not wild applause, but a quiet wave of agreement. The kind of sound that meant the page had finally turned. Laura didn't speak at that meeting. She sat in the 3rd row, back straight, arms folded over her chest, not smug, not aloof, just present. She didn't need to say anything anymore. The swing had already happened. Back home, the new sign on Lot 41B had already weathered a little under the spring sun. She wiped it clean that evening, brushing off some pollen and dirt. As she stood there, looking out over the tall grass and dense edge of trees, a strange calm settled in her chest. This lot had once felt like an afterthought, a sliver of inheritance she didn't know what to do with. Now, it was a line in the sand, and the whole community had seen her draw it. Neighbors started stopping by more often, not just to say thank you, but to talk. A woman from the next block, Denise, told her she'd always wanted to add a ramp to her back porch for her aging mother, but had been too afraid of HOA red tape. Another resident admitted he tore down a compost bin because someone on the board told him it was unsightly, even though no policy said it wasn't allowed. People had stayed silent for so long, assuming the rules were absolute. But Laura had reminded them, policies are only powerful if you don't push back. A few weeks later, Elise sent her an email. Not official board correspondence, just a note. I wanted you to know, we're scrapping the trail expansion plan. It wasn't right. And honestly, none of us knew how much Russell was hiding behind his paperwork. Laura replied simply, thank you, that's all I ever wanted. The board shifted after that, not just in members, but in tone. No more condescension, no more vague threats dressed up as regulations. The HOA didn't become perfect overnight, but it stopped acting like a kingdom, and for Laura, that was enough. One Saturday morning, she was out weeding the front flower bed when a young couple pulled up beside the curb. She didn't recognize them, but their real estate agent stood behind them, clipboard in hand. The woman smiled and pointed toward the house. Is this where? Sorry, I shouldn't ask. But is this where the lady lives who owns the lot next door? Laura stood, wiping her hands on her jeans. That's me. The woman's smile widened. Good, that's why we're buying here. Then she laughed, almost to herself. It's nice to know someone around here doesn't scare easy. That night, Laura walked out to the edge of Lot 41B again, not to defend it, not to protect it, just to stand there, hands in her pockets, breeze brushing against her face, and take it in. It was still her land, still her choice, and for the first time in a long time, no one was trying to take it from her. The new mailbox key, still caught in the lock sometimes. Laura had meant to replace it after the HOA mess died down, but like most things that weren't urgent, it slipped down the list. And now, with the sun peeking over the rooftops and Max snoring on the porch behind her, she didn't really mind. Small inconveniences were easier to live with when no one else was trying to control your home. She pulled out a single envelope, no threats, no warnings, just a folded flyer about a summer block party. Nothing mandatory, no signatures required, just a note in Elise's handwriting. Laura, hope you can make it, bring Max. It wasn't official board stationery, it was a neighbor's invitation, and that small difference said everything. Back inside, the house smelled like cinnamon and coffee. Sophie, her niece, had stopped by to help plant flowers in the side yard. She'd taken over watering Lot 41B lately, more curious than anything else. It's wild that no one knew you owned that strip, she said once. They didn't want to ask, Laura had answered. They just assumed no one would fight back. That answer stuck with Sophie, Laura could tell. And maybe that was the best part of the whole thing. She didn't just hold the line, she showed someone else how to draw one. The new HOA board handled things differently now, fewer citations, more conversations. One resident was even putting up solar panels, an idea that would have been shot down instantly under Russell, but now, there was a subcommittee working on a clean energy policy. Laura didn't join it, but she didn't have to. She'd already played her part. He'd already played her part. She'd turned down a seat on the board twice. Elise had asked gently both times, just in case. You'd be good at it, she said. People listen when you speak. Laura had smiled. Exactly, and that's why I'd rather stay where I am. Sometimes power meant not needing the title. Sometimes the win wasn't in holding the gavel. It was in making sure the people who tried to take your space never got to redraw the map again. One morning, she stood at the edge of Lot 41B with a mug in her hand, watching a pair of squirrels chase each other along the old wooden fence. A couple walked past, pushing a stroller. They smiled, waved. "Morning, Miss Brenner." "Morning." They didn't look nervous. They didn't avoid eye contact because this wasn't the same neighborhood anymore. There were still rules, still forms, still policies and preferences, and probably way too many newsletters, but they weren't weapons anymore. They were guidelines, finally subject to question, and that was the difference. That was the line she had drawn. Weeks later, she received a letter in the mail from the city. It wasn't urgent. Just a note confirming her ownership of both lots, newly updated on the digital zoning map, with full documentation filed. She kept it in the filing cabinet, next to the original deeds, not for legal reasons, just to remind herself that sometimes you don't need to raise your voice, you just need to own what's yours. And if someone tries to take it, you don't move, you don't yell, you hold the paper, stand your ground, and let the facts do the talking, because when truth is on your side, silence is a luxury you can afford.